Welcome to the Rock and Roll Show podcast. We're here to share the magic of experiencing live music together with strangers and with friends, and to get to know our guests a little bit better through their concert experiences. I'm your host, Alex Gadd, and I do this because I love talking about music with people. Finding out what bands someone likes, what shows they've been to allows us to get to know one another and understand one another better. And also, it's just fun to swap stories about the shows we've seen over the years. Today, I'm welcoming Mike Thomas to the show. Mike and I have been friends for more than 20 years now. We met playing rotisserie baseball in a league back in 2005 that we're both still in today. Mike has been to a ton of concerts. I can't wait to hear about some of them. Mike, welcome to the show.
Hey, Alex, thanks for having me.
Glad to talk with you. So to begin with, it's always interesting to me to find out how people got into music, especially people that are really into music like you are. Now, you are a kid of New York City, as am I. We grew up in the city, different times, but how did you first get into music? Was there music around your house? Where did you pick up your interest in music first?
I think I just always was tuned into music from a young age. And I remember, I think some of my first memories of music might be like going to camp and like playing sports and riding in bands and like listening to the radio, probably when I was 8, 9, 10 years old, and just finding myself really fascinated by a lot of the music of the time in the 80s. And yeah, just really drawn towards music. And then I think as I got older, I started to develop tastes that spanned many different spectrums of music. So like I was listening to a lot of different stuff from a young age in terms of like classical music and jazz and rock and hip hop and pop music and classic rock. By the time I was in my early teens, just finding myself really fascinated by it. And I wasn't a musician. I never have been. So I just found myself really drawn towards it from an early age.
Do you have a first favorite band, or was it just everything all at once?
I don't think I had a first favorite band. Not that I can remember. I got into classic rock. My first concert was the Rolling Stones with my mom on the Steel Wheels tour when I was, I guess, 11 at Shea Stadium. I think that was 1988. So I was always into classic rock, like Led Zeppelin, Rolling Stones, Jimi Hendrix, stuff that, you know, pretty mainstream classic rock. And then I remember being really drawn to bands that were kind of pushing some boundaries when I was younger, like Guns N' Roses. I remember buying the Appetite for Destruction tape when I was a kid, and Beastie Boys, License to Ill, stuff like that. It was kind of wild music that was a little different, in particular with the Beastie Boys, as far as like crossing genres and boundaries. So I don't know if my parents would have been thrilled that I was listening to that stuff at such a young age. I just always into a lot of different stuff. I just always kind of had an eclectic taste in music that surprises people when they're like, oh, I didn't think you'd be into this or into that. And I always just let music, just take me where it wants to. I mean, even in the last few years, I've gotten into some different styles of music that I maybe never even thought I would have.
There's a lot to unpack there. I want to go back to two things quickly. I was at your first concert, not with you, but I was also at that show at Shea Stadium, the Rolling Stone Steel Wheels tour. Very good. Living Colour was the opening band at that show. That was a really good show. And also the Beastie Boys. Funny you say that, because I went to see Madonna on her first world tour, and she played at Radio City Music Hall, Like a Virgin tour. So it was 1985, 84 or 85. And the Beastie Boys were the opening act. And it was so inappropriate. They were like, every 6 seats was 5 girls dressed like Madonna and a parent in the whole place. And out come the Beastie Boys as the opening act, grabbing crotches and talking about sex and drugs. And it was hilarious to watch the parents panic. They didn't know what to do. And I don't know that the kids knew what to do either. So I totally get what you're saying. So your first show was the Rolling Stones with your mom. Also, my third show was a Rolling Stones concert in 1981 on the Tattoo You tour with my mom. So I am with you there as well. Do you have any specific memories of that show?
Yeah, I mean, I remember it for sure. I think I have pretty vivid memories of being at Shea Stadium, and I think I remember Sympathy for the Devil for some reason, them playing that song.
Yeah, that's a big showpiece for them. It always is one of their main showpieces. The other thing I remember from that show was that was the first time they did inflatable balloons that were stadium size. They were as big as their whole stage set for Honky Tonk Woman, that suddenly inflated out from behind the stage.
It's so hard.
Yeah, you know, as mainstream as the Rolling Stones are, I feel like there's a lot of really dicey themes in some of their music, and some of their songs are like, wow, like I don't know if this will get made today. I just find that interesting. I think it's something that I don't think I processed it when I was younger.
Sure, I mean, you're young, you don't know all the innuendo and the double
Right.
entendres and all the things. That's how, quite frankly, I learned a ton about nicknames for drugs and
Sure.
sex acts and
Yeah.
all kinds of stuff from rock and roll music. That is one of the reasons I love it. Yeah, Brown Sugar is a perfect example of a Stones song that was one of their biggest hits, one of their most played songs overall in their entire touring
I
life.
mean, that's a dicey song. The lyrics of that song are not PC to say the least. I do not blame them for not playing that song anymore.
Right. But, for 40 years, it was one of their 5
Sure.
most popular
Sure.
songs,
And that tells you a lot about
to play live, and
well, it tells
no
you a
one
lot
blinked.
about how the world has changed. And I think it's probably a good thing that maybe some of these lyrics that talk about slave trading and things like that are not being sung at a concert as much as it's like a wonderful song. It's, maybe not the best message.
I agree. So funny there. After the Rolling Stones, that's when you're 11. At some point, you get into and this is something that I find really interesting about you. You got into the hardcore
Mhm.
music scene in New York that was really exploding in the late '80s.
Yeah, I think I came into it kind of on the tail end. I guess I would say there's certainly been a resurgence of it lately with just like every band I feel like got back together after COVID. All of these really classic New York hardcore bands like Youth of Today and Gorilla Biscuits back together playing, which is amazing. But those two bands in particular, who were like seminal New York hardcore bands, were playing at that time when I got into it, which was probably 94. But there was plenty of hardcore bands. There was more of a big like post-hardcore scene, as it was called, and punk and a crossover bands. It was still a very vibrant scene, and I was able to go to a lot of shows by myself. Thank goodness for no cell phones and having autonomy as a kid, and just being like, all right, I'm 16. I'm going to this show at CBGB's and on Sunday afternoon, and my parents are like, have fun or whatever, going to wetlands. So
Yeah,
yeah, I think about it now. Like I went to so many shows at CBGB's and just all these 16 and up shows, and I just able to
right.
navigate that myself, and was sort of I don't want to say like disillusioned with high school, but wasn't really like super fitting in. And then found myself to really connect with this scene and was just going to shows left and right with a couple of friends that I had that were also in the scene. It was not expensive. And so you have $5 and you go get into a show, and it was cathartic and amazing. And just to see a scene where people were connecting in this really meaningful way and accepting of so many different types of people, which was like kind of the opposite of what a typical high school scene is. But like straight edge people and not straight edge people and punk rockers and hardcore kids and people that weren't either or, and everyone being pretty cool with one another and just grateful to be there.
I'm so interested in this because it's so alien to me. I also went to CB's, but not often, and I was living in Connecticut by then, so it was a
Sure.
trek to get there for me, and I only went to see bands that were playing CBs because they wanted to play CBs. They could play larger places, but they wanted to say they play CBs. So I saw Living Color there a couple times
Yeah, I
when
saw
they
them
were
once
early
there
on.
too.
Can you talk about that transition a little bit more? You're 11, you're listening to classic rock, you're listening to the radio. By 16, you're into the hardcore scene. I know you started a fanzine. Was that part of your entree?
The zine thing was because of the music thing. So I think in the early 90s, I was getting into some heavier stuff, some grunge. Pearl Jam 10 was a big influential album for me. Soundgarden, Super Unknown. Rage Against the Machines album was huge for me in terms of, okay, this is kind of taking the Beastie Boys thing to a different level where it's like, it's rap, and it's hardcore, right? Zach De La Rocha was in a hardcore band, Inside Out before he was in radio machines, like hardcore background, and then playing this style of music that had elements of that. And that was really influential for me. I think got into some of that heavier stuff, and that paved the way for me to just start listening to different things. You know, met a couple of people that were into the heavier style of music. And I think we kind of took off, like the three of us connected on that, and were hanging out and started buying CDs and listening to tapes. Then that transitioned into, wow, I can go to these shows. Once that became
Mhm.
evident, uh, it felt like a very natural transition. Like I was a pretty big sports kid, not a jock, but I was like basketball, basketball, basketball. And then I stopped playing basketball because I wasn't good enough to play varsity. And I was tired of wasting my time and like throwing up at practice in the morning. So then I really dove deep into music and it felt very natural. Maybe that grunge stuff is what was the bridge to then getting
Yeah.
into metal and grunge and Metallica, right? I think Metallica got into some of their stuff 91, 92, and that was also like, oh, now I'm listening to metal and now I'm listening to some more tuned down stuff. And then I think getting into hardcore, it felt very natural. And then connecting with the scene, I was like, wow, I can go to these concerts. It's accepting. It felt like a very enriching place to be. And then, yeah, I was always into journalism. So then I was like, hey, I'm going to do my own zine and was able to put it together at my school. It was like a real passion of mine.
For the people that are listening that don't know, could you set the scene for what the hardcore scene was? Because what I was interested in is it seemed so intimidating and almost dangerous from the outside. But having spoken to you and from other people, I found out that it really was the most inclusive music scene that there
It's
was.
a great question, Alex. And I think it's also somewhat of a maybe metaphor for a lot of things in our society that on the surface looks rough and it looks dangerous and it looks intimidating, right? There's all these people with tattoos, piercings, and that wasn't me. I don't have a single tattoo. I've never had any piercings. I was not a straight edge kid. But straight edge kid
Yeah.
would have that too. Straight edge just being like not drinking, no drugs.
Okay, I want to clarify so we know what the terms are.
Yeah, so straight edge would be like you put X's on your hands and it's like no substance use, right? So that's like being a straight edge kid. And then there was also a big vegan scene. A lot of these scenes that were before they were sort of maybe more mainstream. Now, obviously, veganism is super well known and mainstream, but this is way before that. That was something I learned
Sure.
about in the hardcore scene. Like, oh, here's the vegan kids, and everyone's referred to as a kid, right? And here's the straight edge kids, right? And here's the stoner kids. But it wasn't like the vegan kids would be like, oh, you eat meat, you can't talk to me. I mean, there were some more militant type of people, but in general, everyone was like, hey, you're here for the music. Let's all get along. And I think people also think about maybe punk rock and they think of skinheads and all that. And it's not what I thought it would have been too. And I remember being intimidated going as well. And then being like, wow, this isn't so scary. People are really nice. You meet someone that looks like he might, throw you out of that 8-story window, but he's like the nicest guy you'll ever meet. So that taught me a lot about, hey, you can't
Yeah.
just look at someone and say, this person is this or that. And growing up in New York, I already had an introduction into that of, hey, listen, you have to be accepting and inclusive. You can't take a look at someone and judge a book by its cover because you'll get in a lot of trouble that way. And I think my dad sort of figured that I think they were a little bit apprehensive. And then it became like, hey, I'm really into this. I'm using my dad's car. I'm driving to shows out in New Jersey or Connecticut or wherever and really traveling around to do this stuff because I was so invested in the scene. Bands were really inclusive. I remember going to shows with bands because I was doing my zine and they let me go with them to the show in their van. I was some 16, 17-year-old kid from Manhattan on the Upper East Side, but no one judged me for who I was on the surface. I didn't look like what you'd expect maybe for a hardcore kid, but I met tons of great people and always had a blast and it never seemed like a popularity contest ever. So it really did teach me really truly like, hey, everybody deserves respect and you treat everybody with kindness and that goes a really long way. And I think it's helped me tremendously in many areas of my life. So I owe a lot to that scene of music for sure.
Do you have a favorite hardcore band from that period that you did like to see more than others? Was there one band that stood out?
Man, there's so many bands. One of my favorite bands at the time, which was like a post-hardcore band, was this band Quicksand. That they're playing again, they're back together. I used to see this band It All a lot that are pretty classic New York hardcore bands. I just saw there's so many bands. It was pretty extensive. And then I got into a lot of, I'd say heavier, more metalcore type of band. I definitely still have some carryover of some heavier music that I do listen to, even though I would say I'm not in the scene anymore, so to speak.
Okay. You're in the hardcore scene, you're in high school. What's the next evolution
So
of
yeah, the next evolution was, was getting into Phish. Now I'm going the total opposite direction. Just another example of I like what I like, and my ears kind of opened up to this new style. It was amazing. I remember going to my first Phish show in Hershey, Pennsylvania in 1995 with a couple of friends, and just being blown away by it. And then from there, I was like seeing tons of Phish. I'm going to go to New Year's that year. And then next thing you know, I'm going on Phish tour. I can't even imagine what my parents must have thought I was like just completely nuts. But that was still high school. That was the end of high school for me. And then after that, it was college and going to tons of shows. It just became all about doing Phish tour. And I think it was doing a lot of what the hardcore stuff was doing for me. It was that cathartic release, that aspect of music that is unlike anything else. And the way that Phish would experiment and no show was the same. It was super influential in my musical evolution. And I remember this one guy who was a singer in this hardcore band that I liked was also this like huge Phish head. And I remember I'd like see him at Phish shows, and it was just funny. We were like, hey, we're the two people in the scene that are into Phish. Other people in the scene would be like, that is like the worst band ever. I can't believe you're listening to Phish. That's horrible.
And so how did you get into Phish? Someone just said, "Come to Hershey. I want to show you the band." Had you already heard them? Because one of the things you talked about earlier is that some of the hardcore bands were playing at Wetlands. Wetlands was really a jam band scene. That's where Blues Traveler broke. That's where Phish used to play in New York. So how did you make that connection to start even focusing your attention on Phish?
It was some of our mutual friends that got me into it. And we're like, hey, you should check this out. And I liked what I heard. And I was like, I'll go to the show. Let's do it. It
Yeah.
was an adventure. And then I immediately was just like blown away. Love at first sight. And I want to go see every show now. I mean, I remember it being that simple. My friends knew, they said, hey, Phish isn't like the Dead. Now I love the Dead, but at that time I was not into Dead. I found it to be too slow and didn't really capture my attention. But they're like, hey, this band's going to capture attention because it is fast and it's really jammy. And there's like maybe some metal aspects. You're really going to like it. And they were right.
The other thing that struck me about what you were talking about the hardcore scene that syncs up nicely with the Phish crowd is that it was very welcoming and very kind of not do it yourself the way the hardcore scene was. I mean, Phish played
Right.
Madison Square Garden,
Yeah.
not
Yeah.
CBGBs at 3 o'clock on a Saturday afternoon. But the crowd and the traveling sense of community, I could see that same appeal. Is that am I seeing it the right way?
Very much so. There's a significant parallel there where it was very accepting. And I met so many people going to Phish shows and connected with so many people. And going on tour, I had so many friends, and the camaraderie was amazing. And yeah, it was very much a do it yourself thing in terms of like we did a couple tours and I would, sell food, and we were rolling around with deep pockets. You get your tickets and maybe $100 and you go out on tour and you're camping, you're staying at $30, $40 hotels with 4 people and you're selling food. I would set up and sell quesadillas and make stuff and grilled cheese, and then was making stickers and shirts and selling all this stuff, trying not to get run out by security. You do that stuff. And it was in the entrepreneurial spirit because I like to make stuff and do it to help me, like a means to an end. It was like, hey, if we make this stuff and we do this, we can afford to do this tour. Our parents weren't like, hey, here's $1,000, go on Phish tour. They're like, if you want to do this shit, you figure it out yourself. And
Right.
we did. It was a really great lesson in self-sufficiency. And obviously we're privileged to be able to do something like that. It was kind of rough in it when I think about it, but it was awesome. We got to see the country and not having the whole cell phones and stuff. And our parents are just like, all right, see you later. Check in with them every once in a while and cross their fingers and hope we weren't dead. And we made it through. But yes, the sense of community was absolutely astounding. And it still is at Phish. And I think that's something that people
Yep.
really need. That's what they get out of music, is that sense of community in a world where, especially now, it can be very hard to find.
It's so isolating our culture today. So for when you can break through that, I get it completely. We've been talking about your beginnings. Just juxtapose that with what's the most recent concert you've seen?
I went in June. I went to see Joe Russo's Almost Dead, which is like a very prominent Dead cover band or whatever you want to call it, tribute band.
Tribute band, yeah. Where did you see them?
They play at Red Rocks every
Yeah.
year. I always enjoy going to see them, and the Dead have been something that I've gotten into more in the last few years. I really enjoy the way that J-Rad paid tribute to the Dead, and it was
Yeah.
a very different Joe Russo show because it was out there. They have Branford Marsalis playing with them. It was pretty wild. It was like jazzy and spacey. I was with a big group of people, and a lot of the people were not feeling it. They're like, what is going on? It was out there, but I loved it. I was like,
Yeah.
man, this is almost sounds like I'm at like Rich's Brew or some stuff like that. But I love that about music, and I've always am open to it. So that's the last show I
Sure.
went to. And then I think before that probably was November when I saw Quicksand also here in Denver.
Were you able to go and reconnect?
I didn't really go out of my way to do that. I don't know. I feel like I could have tried to do that, but I just was like, I'm just going to go to the show and enjoy it and be on my way.
Of all the shows you've seen, can you share with us one or two of the most memorable shows?
That is a really tough question. Instantly, what pops to mind for me is a CBGB show where I saw this band Neurosis, who are not maybe like the most, I don't know, popular band. They're not really a band anymore, unfortunately. Their frontman kind of got in some trouble. But that being said, one of the most influential bands for me as a listener in my life, and definitely one of a crossover from like hardcore to metal. Pretty unique band. It's hard to pinpoint them, but they're certainly were appreciated in the hardcore scenes, in the punk scenes, in the noise scene, kind of all over the place. But I saw them in 1994 at CBGB's up front, taking pictures with my camera because I was doing it for my zine. And I don't know if I've ever seen a more intense band than that. It's hard to explain how intense it is and how all consuming it is, and how loud it is. And I just remember being at that show and just thinking that this was the most powerful performance I've ever seen. And just my entire
Wow.
senses being completely consumed. I think I probably couldn't hear after that show for about 3 or 4 days. I still can certainly attribute CBGBs to some portion of hearing loss I'm sure that I've encountered.
I think most people that went there more than once or twice can.
It was loud, and I didn't wear earplugs. I was not intelligent enough to wear earplugs. You got to get the full spectrum of that sound. I don't want to dull it down by any earplugs at all. I just remember seeing this music. It was very dark music, but what it did for me was I just remember feeling like this natural high that was like, this is like something I've never experienced, even seeing other bands. This is like on another level what they're doing. The sonic power of that band. So that's one for sure. As far as like another memorable show, I would say like probably a Phish show. I don't know if I could pick out like just one. I was fortunate enough to go do 98 Europe tour also with some friends of common of ours. And that was a whole wild experience of going to see a bunch of Phish shows in Europe. So I definitely can say that those were very memorable. I saw a show in Prague that I have very visceral memories from, and also a show in Copenhagen that was in this place, Christiana, that's like a commune, not part of the city. And that was a wild experience.
Yeah, that's interesting because Russ was on this podcast much earlier, and he also noted that tour as being one of his most memorable experiences.
We experienced it together. I think I was 21 then, and traveling around Europe, seeing music and filling the time in between and seeing Phish in these smaller venues. I mean, it was a really cool experience. And looking back on it now, I'm just like, wow, I'm so glad that I went and did that. And music is something that's helped me to just also say, hey, when you want to go do something, just go do it, because you never know if you'll be able to see that band again or see that band in that place again. So if you're thinking of doing it, if I can, I better go.
Hey, our motto on this podcast is life is short, so get those concert tickets. So
Totally.
that's exactly what you're
Yeah.
saying. I'm right there. Yep. On the other end of that, what's the most disappointing concert you've ever been to?
Most disappointing concert I've ever been to. Man.
I mean, I fell asleep at a George Winston concert once, so That's right up there. And then seeing the Foo Fighters a couple of weeks ago and getting rained out halfway
Oh
through was a
man,
whole different kind of
that
disappointment.
is
So
that is disappointing.
there's different ways to look at it, but for you, however, however it
Yeah.
speaks to you.
I'm gonna say that probably the most disappointing show I've been to would be a recent Phish show that I didn't like. Because when I
Yeah.
see a Phish show now that I don't like, I really find it to be uninspiring. That being said, I saw them last year and
Mhm.
found it to be like very good, but I think seeing them the year before, maybe not so much. I think they're in like a really great place right now where they're dialed in, but just where they're going right now is not my favorite thing, but I do appreciate how talented they are and how much they keep evolving to do different things. I saw Metallica once and I wasn't very impressed with that. That's another one that maybe was not the best show.
Now, overall, if you can, who is the best live act you've ever seen?
The best live act I've ever seen, I would have told you Phish a long time ago if you talked to me. I don't hold that opinion anymore. The most impactful live band I've seen in the last few years would be King Gizzard and the Lizard Wizard, because I went to see them last year at Red Rocks, sight unseen, never listened to them. That band really blew me away live, but it's so rare to go into a show with, I truly had no expectations. I didn't know, I never listened to them. And I went in and was like, this is absolutely incredible. And these guys are insane musicians and people are going crazy over this band. The energy in the place was significant and it was unique in that they really have a unique sort of sound. While they are kind of like a jam band, it's not. Just their exploration of
Mhm.
different genres, um, whether it's rock, whether it's jam, whether it's jazz, whether it's heavy metal, psychedelic, super psychedelic, crazy electronic stuff, using all these different instruments, like playing the flute, like playing horns. It's hard to put that band into a box because they do so many different things and they have so much material. So when you go to see them, you don't really know what you're going to get. I mean, I saw 2 shows, Red Rocks last year, and it was like 2 different bands. It speaks to how talented they are and how many different styles of music they can play and blend together. I'm going to go see them again coming up here in September. And I'm very excited.
I love that answer for a lot of reasons, but one of them is that my favorite question on the podcast is, have you ever discovered a band only after seeing them live? And you just answered that question. So because I know you got into them, I am now looking for an opportunity to see them as well. So I am ready, and I'm not listening to them ahead of time so that I can experience it live for the first time.
You should go, man. I mean, you should absolutely go. They're from Australia, so they're coming a long way. And I think if you can go see a show, that's the best way for me to find out about a band. It's happened to me before a few times where I've gone and seen a band open and been like, wow, what is this? See a band live and find out about them that way. To me, it doesn't get much better than that. It's almost like accidentally finding this hidden gem. It's really spectacular.
Right. That's happened to me a number of times as well. And it has always been a special experience for me when that happens. So I'm always looking for it to happen again. And I try to catch as many live acts as I can now. And certainly more often than not, I'm underwhelmed, but I only have to be knocked out once every once in a while to make it more than worth it.
It's worth the effort. Another show I'm really excited about going to see, that's another band that really blew me away when I saw them, is the Budos Band. They're from Staten Island. They're this crazy instrumental sort of jazz, Afro, rock, funk fusion. I don't know what you call them. People might know them because a lot of their music is actually on that show, The Bear. And they have probably made a lot of money getting some of their music put into TV and film. But I saw them live out here. It was amazing. And they're coming out, and like, I'm super lucky. I don't even think they're a tour. They're just coming out to play like one show in Colorado. So I'm going to that in November. And that band I look forward to seeing every time. And they are absolutely incredible. So if you ever get a chance to see them, they are a phenomenal, phenomenal band.
One of my favorite parts about doing this podcast is learning about bands I didn't know anything about so that I can get turned to them. So thank you. Have you had the experience of being at a show and having the artists bring out a special guest unannounced?
Yeah, I mean, Phish.
Phish was great. My answer to that question is Phish in Brooklyn. I saw them bring out
Oh, yeah,
Jay-Z, and that
you
was
saw that one, yeah.
awesome.
Not not quite as talented as Jay-Z, but I think I remember seeing Phish in Vegas bring out Kid Rock. It was wild because I'm like, what a strange. But, also, I saw Phish have Buddy Guy came out at Madison Square Garden one time. That
That
one's
was
really
great.
memorable to me,
Yeah.
and that was spectacular.
I just wanna focus on venues for a few minutes. You've talked about Red Rocks a lot. Most concerts at what?
It's probably CBGB's. Yeah, I think just how many shows I went to over a few years in New York. It must be
Sure.
CBGB's.
Which is great because it was such a classic, important venue in the evolution of rock music overall, and it's no longer there, so you literally got to capture something in the moment that no one can get anymore.
I
So
feel
that's
very
special.
fortunate to have gotten to experience that.
How about a favorite concert venue?
Probably Red Rocks now. Very, very lucky to have it so close in my backyard. Close to get to, not necessarily easy to get to because it's kind of tough getting in and out of there in terms of transportation sometimes. But yeah, that venue is spectacular. And I hadn't gone for many years and I started going again the last couple of years. And now I'm making it a point to go to at least a couple of shows every year. It's just such an amazing place to see music. When they get the sound right, it's pretty amazing. And it's super beautiful. So you really get quite an experience.
On the opposite side of that, do you have a least favorite concert venue, someplace you try now to avoid when possible?
I think
Mhm,
the last
mhm.
place I'd probably go see a show now, I know you just went to Shea Stadium. I don't think I could go to a stadium show. I just have so little interest in seeing a band in a place that big and cavernous that um, I don't think I would go.
Yeah, it's become a point of consideration for me in this past year because, the bands that I like the most that are still playing are the bands from my childhood. There's no way to get around that for me. Not only, but a lot of them, and they're among the most popular touring
Sure.
acts in the world, and so for them, it's beneficial to play the biggest show possible so that in the fewest amount of gigs,
Oh
they can
yeah.
make the most money. So, as I said about the Foos, they can play 2 shows at Citi Field or 5 shows at the Garden and get to basically the same number of tickets sold. And so they can make basically the same amount of money in 3 less nights' work. Why wouldn't they do that? The only thing about that is that it's really no fun to watch your favorite bands on TV essentially because they're too far away to actually watch.
That's just where I draw the line. And maybe some might say, oh, you're being a snob. And I mean, that being said, Fish plays in Denver at Dick's Sporting Goods Stadium, which is a soccer stadium, but it's small. It's like 25. And when you go, I was very, very pleasantly surprised because you're on the floor and it's just the field. It's just like being at a GA show. It was pretty cool. That did not feel like a stadium show, but it's interesting. And I know this is like your bread and butter, but the last true stadium show I saw was your boy Bruce Springsteen, which is the only time I've seen Bruce Springsteen. And that was probably 2003 or something like that. It was a long time ago. And I got free
Yeah.
tickets and went to see him
Yep.
at my was then Mile High Stadium. And I just remember being like,
Right.
this is awful. Not the Bruce Springsteen part. I've never been a big Bruce Springsteen fan, but I was stoked to see the boss because I'm like,
Unders
hey, this is one of the most influential musicians ever. And I like some of his stuff. But I remember being like, man, I feel so far away and disconnected from the music. And I know that people have these transformative experiences. I've seen Taylor Swift and a lot of acts at these giant venues. That's great. I'm not one to negate that, but just for me, if that's what it takes, I'd rather not go.
Here's my dilemma. I've never seen Def Leppard. I happen to love Def Leppard. I'm a huge Def Leppard fan. They came out right at the sweet spot for me. I was 11, 12 when their first videos came on MTV. And so Def Leppard for me was foundational and I've never seen them. For whatever reasons, I've not made the effort to go see them. They are playing next week at Citi Field and it is taking all of my will to
Who's
not
playing
buy
with them?
tickets for that because they're playing a co-headlining show with Journey, who I couldn't care less about, and Steve Miller Band is opening up the show. Originally, they had Heart on the show, And I love Heart, and I've never seen them, so I was really excited to go see the show to see Def Leppard and Heart. But then Ann Wilson had a problem, and they canceled all their touring dates. So I think I'm going to pass, but
I,
it is going to be a real disappointment to miss Def Leppard because they're still playing and playing well, and they sing their own stuff, and they sound pretty good, and they're still recording new.
I would imagine you're going to have an opportunity to see them in a smaller place than that. I'm just amazed that these bands can fill up City Field like Def Leppard. That's shocking to me.
But you're right, Mike, because they can only fill it up by doing a co-headlining tour with Journey. And in 5 years, I expect they'll be doing the amphitheater legacy tour circuit the way that bands like REO Speedwagon and Foreigner do those kinds of shows, because that's the only shows they can fill up.
I'm going to say, hey, man, skip them at City Field and go see them when it's a more intimate experience. But it is unfortunate.
Yeah, I will. And I'll wait. I'll
Yeah.
wait as long as I have to.
Yeah, it's a dilemma, right? I was kind of interested in seeing the Foo Fighters. I think I've lost interest, but like before they canceled tour last year, they were going to play Mile High. I was like, wow, tickets are only like $40 or $50. They can
Yeah.
charge a lot more. They're still making a lot of money, but good for them. And then I was like, I can't do it. And then I know a lot of people that went to see the Chili Peppers. And I was like, oh, I'd love to see the Chili Peppers. But I was like, I don't want to go. So again, like I'm being stubborn, but I think it's like, yeah, I just draw the line there.
And that's where I've come down.
I thought of another concert. You were asking me about the most memorable concerts I've seen. And it struck me now that I think it's really relevant because of the Olympics. One of the most memorable concerts I saw, it must have been, I think it was 2010. It might've been 2009. I saw this band Gojira. I saw them a few times in the late 2000s and into the mid 2010. I was a huge Gojira fan.
Sure.
They're a little bit different now. They're more mainstream. They're obviously a huge metal band, but I remember seeing them in Albuquerque when I was living down in Southwest Colorado, and I drove to Albuquerque to see them. And that show just blew my mind. They were so heavy and so good. Then, you know, happened to be having the Olympic opening ceremony on and saw, you know, my wife's like, hey, look, what's this band? And I'm like, no one knew their plan. I was like, holy shit, Gojira. And
They were great too.
yeah, that was the best part of the opening ceremony. My mom was like, that was amazing. You know, my mom loved it. And I'm like,
Yeah.
wow, it was just so cool to see a band that I've been connected to and I've seen them in front of 300 people and a small kind of indie-ish band. And then to see them on that stage so well represented. And I'm like, man, this is so cool to see this.
It was great. They did such a good job.
Just like appreciating how a band of that style, of a true metal style, this underground style, being elevated to this platform. When my mom told me she loved it, I was like, well, they really knocked it out of the park because that is not my mom's cup of tea.
Right. They cross genres for that one. Just a couple more questions and I will get you out of here. But on your bucket list, is there a band that's still performing that is the one you most want to see?
I don't know. I mean, I guess my best answer would be if they got back together, it would be Pink Floyd. And I would probably go see them in a stadium.
So would
But that
I.
doesn't, that's not.
It's never going to happen. But David Gilmour just released a record this week, I believe. So he should be touring in smaller places, and I'm definitely going to go. I think, actually, I take it back. He's playing arenas because he's playing the Garden.
Arenas are fine. I would go see. Yeah, that would be good. And there's certainly some jazz musicians out there that I've never seen that I would like to probably see. But I don't know if I would call it like a bucket list thing where I'm like, I have to go.
Sure. And then the last bucket list question, is there a concert venue that you most want to see a show at? Now, you see shows at Red Rocks regularly. For most of the people that have been on the show, the answer to this question is Red Rocks.
Right.
So for you, is there a place you most like to go see a show that you haven't yet?
Maybe the Greek Theater would be on that list. I've heard pretty wonderful things about that. Real Albert Hall is a pretty good one. I haven't been there. I think that could be up there. I don't know if there's anywhere else. I've heard really good things about the Forest Hills.
So it's interesting. I only saw one show there, and it was 40 years ago, 41 years ago. I went to see
Wow.
Yes. on their 90125 record. Right when they got back together and they put out the
Right.
Owner of
Yeah.
a
Yeah.
Lonely
That's
Heart.
it.
And so that's when they were just started doing live shows there again, because they had shut down after tennis moved to the Arthur Ashe Center and the new tennis facility, and then they reopened, but now it's been renovated yet again, and it's apparently an amazing place to see shows. I've
Man,
heard that.
that's funny you bring up. Yes, that's another band I loved. Yes. I pulled up my yearbook. I had a Yes quote in my yearbook. I was a huge Yes
Nice.
fan, like big on the Yes, not as big on Rush in terms of like the prog stuff.
Yeah, I was bigger on Rush, but I did like Yes when they reformed.
But yeah, in terms of other venues, I don't know. I think I'd just be open to going to new places that people rave about.
Let's start making a list for you so you can check them all off the
And there's
list.
places I'd like to go back to that I've seen shows at that I haven't in a long time. That would be really cool. I mean, I haven't seen a show at the Garden in a while, and that would be
Oh, it's the best. It's still, to me, my favorite venue. They do a good job with the sound, and every band, this is my opinion, but to me, every band gets just a little more amped up when they're playing the Garden.
yeah. That's another really memorable show. 2008, I saw Radiohead there, and I think that's the last concert I saw at the Garden too. But just I remember being way up high, and it sounded incredible. And I was just thinking, man, this place really does sound amazing for an arena. So yeah, I would love to go back. I think to see a show there. MSG would be at the top of the list, even though I have been there before. I really need to go see another show there.
Yeah, well, if you do, please
Yeah,
let me know.
definitely.
I'd love to go with. All right, the big finale, the last question. What is it about live music that keeps you going back for more and keeps you seeking out new experiences? Because to you, obviously, you've seen literally thousands of shows and your musical tastes have evolved and the times have changed, but you're still looking for those experiences. What is it about that?
Oh, there's just nothing like it. It is unique to anything else. It's an experience where visually, sonically, you feel it in your body, the cathartic aspect. It can be incredibly therapeutic. There's a feeling of going to a good concert when you leave that is unlike anything else. And it also, I think the cool thing about music, particularly, I think this way about like jazz music is it acts like an eraser for other things, whether it's like put on jazz and it will erase a bad song that's annoying, that's flipping around in your head, or just put on music to change your mood or to transition. Like I'm going to put on this record because I feel this way right now and I want to feel differently, or I feel this way and I want to feel more
Mhm.
like this. Right. So I think music has that ability to really be transformative in setting the tone and really being an incredible tool that you can use. So live music is the best example of that because you're seeing it, you're tasting it, you're smelling it, you're feeling it.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. Well, Mike, that's it for today. I appreciate your time and your thoughtful responses. It's great to talk to you about this.
Yeah. Thanks so much for having me on, Alex. It's been a pleasure.
Yeah, right on. And that's it for today's conversation. Thank you all for joining us. We'll be back next Tuesday. And if you like what you heard today, we'd appreciate it if you would subscribe or follow to make sure you get notified about every new episode. And please tell your friends. Also, a reminder that I'm going to release a playlist for every episode of the show. So look for the Rock and Roll Show podcast playlist on Spotify every week, featuring songs by the bands mentioned during each episode. So check that out. Additionally, we want to know what you think. So please leave us a comment and we'll try to respond to every one of them. The Rock and Roll Show podcast is a World Highway Media production. I'm your host, Alex Gadd. And until next time, remember that life is short, so get those concert tickets.